stood at the observation window of the diplomatic station, looking down at Earth. The blue planet turned slowly below him, and he could see the swirls of white clouds moving over the continents. He had been away from home for 3 years now, serving as humanity's representative to the Galactic Council. Most people back on Earth thought it was an honor. Knew better. It was mostly a thankless job. The station orbited between Mars and the asteroid belt, a neutral ground where 5 major species met to decide the fate of the galaxy. They came from the eastern spiral arm, tall beings with hard skin and harder opinions about everything. There were traders and mathematicians, their forearms always busy with calculations and contracts. They were an ancient race, older than any other civilization in the known galaxy. They spoke little and judged everything. And then there were the humans, the newcomers, the species that had only joined the galactic community 50 years ago. Turned away from the window and headed toward the council chamber. He had received a message an hour ago that an emergency meeting was being called. The Empire had crossed a major border and was moving toward the core territories with military force. This was not a trade dispute or a resource argument. This was war. The council chamber was already full when arrived. The commander, a massive being named, stood at the head of the table. His skin had turned a darker shade of gray, which had learned meant anger. The representatives whispered to each other, their forearms making complex gestures as they calculated probability and loss rates. The elder simply sat in silence, watching everyone with ancient eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. Took his seat at the far end of the table. It was the weakest position in the room, placed there on purpose. The message was clear. Humans were present because the council had to include them, not because anyone wanted them there. Began speaking in the common language that all species used for official business. His voice was deep and made the air vibrate. He explained that the forces had superior technology and greater numbers. The council would need to assemble a combined fleet to defend the Meridian sector, where 3 critical trade routes met. They would command the operation. They would handle logistics and calculations. They would provide ancient weapons and knowledge from their long history. Then looked directly at. The commander's expression did not change, but his voice took on a sharper edge. Humanity could contribute military ships to the defense effort, he said. Not many, perhaps 20 vessels from the human fleet. They would be positioned at the outer perimeter of the battle formation, away from the main conflict. They would follow orders precisely and not take any independent action. Paused and added one more instruction. One human representative would travel with the fleet to ensure that humanity did not embarrass the alliance through reckless behavior or incompetence. Understood immediately that he had just been assigned to babysit human ships in a galactic war. The meeting ended quickly. The council members filed out of the chamber, already discussing the strategic calculations and the probability of victory. They predicted they would win with 73% certainty. They had more optimistic numbers. They simply said nothing, which made nervous. In his experience, when they stayed silent, it usually meant something important was coming. Traveled back to the observation deck. He wanted to be alone to think about what had just happened. 20 ships. Humanity was being allowed to send 20 ships out of a combined fleet of over 300 vessels. That was less than 7% of the total force, and they would be positioned at the edges, where they would see the battle but not truly participate in it. He opened a secure communication channel back to Earth. The transmission took almost 10 minutes to reach the military command center in Geneva. He reported everything that had happened. He explained the strategy and the position they had given to human forces. He waited for the response. The message came back from General Winters, the commander of Earth's Space Defense Force. Her face appeared on the screen, and she looked tired. She had been dealing with the political and military challenges of preparing humanity for galactic conflict. She told that the human ships would arrive at the Meridian sector in 5 days. The crews had been selected carefully. They were the best pilots, the best engineers, and the best fighters that humanity had to offer. General Winters said something else, something that had not expected. She told him that the human crews had been trained not just to follow the commander's orders, but to think creatively and adapt to unexpected situations. She said that humans had fought wars on Earth for thousands of years, and they had learned how to survive against better-equipped enemies through cunning and determination. Asked her if she understood what the commander had ordered. The human ships were supposed to stay at the perimeter. They were supposed to follow orders. They were supposed to be decorative, he said. General Winters' reply was simple and direct. She told him to watch carefully during the battle. She told him that humans had a gift for doing more than what was expected of them. When the communication ended, stood alone at the observation window again. Earth continued to turn slowly below him. Somewhere down there were billions of people who had no idea that their species was about to be tested in the most serious way possible. In 5 days, human ships would arrive. In 7 days, the first shots would be fired, and humanity would finally have the chance to show the galaxy what it was truly made of. Did not know it yet, but this moment would change everything. Not just for humanity, but for every species in the known galaxy. The underestimated were about to teach the universe a lesson about courage, sacrifice, and the power of beings who fought not for glory, but for the protection of others. He looked at the stars surrounding the station and wondered which of them would bear witness to humanity's transformation from curiosity to legend. The combined fleet moved through space in perfect geometric formation. The ships formed the center, their massive vessels bristling with weapons and advanced technology. The merchant warships took secondary positions, designed more for durability than aggression. The ancient craft hung at the rear, dormant weapon systems that had not fired in 1,000 years suddenly coming online. And at the very edges, like insects circling the edge of a table, the 20 human ships of the ISS Venture class positioned themselves exactly where they had been ordered to wait. Captain Hayes sat in the command chair of the ISS Venture, the flagship of the human contingent. The ship was small compared to the vessels, but her crew was sharp. Every person on this ship had volunteered, knowing they might not come home. Hayes had selected them personally. She knew each crew member's family situation, their fears, and their strengths. The tactical display in front of her showed the enemy approaching from the border. Red markers filled the screen as fighters and larger craft moved toward the Meridian sector. The numbers were worse than the commander had predicted. There were not 3 enemy fleets. There were 4. They had sent more ships than anyone had calculated. Hayes looked at her communications officer, a young woman named. Hands were steady as she worked the controls, but Hayes could see the tension in her shoulders. This was first real combat situation. Everyone on this ship was young. The oldest crew member was 42. The youngest was 19. They were going into battle against an enemy with superior numbers and unknown capabilities. The commander's voice came over the general frequency, cold and precise. All ships were ordered to maintain formation. All ships were ordered to follow the predetermined tactical plan. No deviations would be tolerated. The message was specifically directed at the human ships. Everyone understood it. The first wave of fighters appeared on the scanner at extreme range. They were faster than anyone had expected. The ships began moving into their calculated formation, positioning their weapons to maximize coverage of the battle space. The ships adjusted their positions based on complex probability equations. The ships remained still, waiting for the moment when their ancient weapons would be needed. Hayes watched the red markers move across her screen. The fighters were dividing into multiple attack vectors. They were not focusing on them. Instead, they were moving toward the ships, probably because they were less well-armored. It was a smart tactical choice. Hayes made a decision that would have cost her her career if it had gone wrong. She ignored the commander's order to maintain formation. She sent 3 of her fastest ships toward the position. She knew it was wrong. She knew she was risking everything. She did it anyway. The human ships accelerated faster than they had thought possible. They were smaller and more nimble, designed for speed rather than firepower. They positioned themselves between the approaching fighters and the convoy. It was a suicide run, or it should have been. The ships should have been destroyed, and the human ships should have followed them into darkness. But something unexpected happened. The human ships moved in ways that made no tactical sense according to conventional calculations. They swerved and twisted through the incoming fire in patterns that seemed random, but were actually based on split-second human decisions. The pilots could see the threat coming and respond faster than any computer calculation. They could feel the way the ship wanted to move and adjust their actions in real time. One fighter locked weapons on the ISS Vanguard, the human ship closest to the position. The pilot, a man named, did not try to outrun the weapon or calculate the perfect evasive maneuver. He simply twisted his ship and threw it into a roll that the fighter's targeting system could not predict. The weapon passed harmlessly through the space where his ship had been a moment before. The other human ships were doing the same thing. They were not fighting according to the rules. They were fighting like humans, with instinct and courage and a willingness to risk death to protect others. The ships managed to escape the attack vector, and they sent an immediate message expressing gratitude to the human crews. The commander's response was ice. He ordered all ships back to formation immediately. He said that humanity had violated direct orders and nearly caused the destruction of Allied forces through reckless behavior. The human ships were to return to the perimeter and await instructions. Hayes wanted to argue. She wanted to explain that she had just saved the convoy, but she did not. She ordered her ships back to their original positions. She would follow orders from this moment forward, even if it meant watching her allies die while she did nothing to stop it. But something important had changed. The forces had felt the impact of human intervention. They had expected the combined fleet to fight in predictable ways. They had calculated responses to mechanical tactical formations. They had not calculated what would happen when a species fought with pure instinct and human courage. As the battle continued, the commander's perfectly calculated formation began to fall apart. They were stronger in some positions and weaker in others. The mathematics that they had used to predict victory began to fail. The ancient knowledge of the proved less useful than expected against an enemy that did not fight in ways that the old records had documented. The battle raged for hours. Ships were damaged. Crew members died. The tide of victory seemed to shift back and forth, pulled by forces that no one fully understood. And through it all, the human ships waited at the perimeter, their crews watching the battle unfold, their weapons ready but unused. Hayes stood on her bridge, looking at the tactical display. She had done what she was told. She had followed orders. She had positioned her ships where the commander wanted them. And she hated herself for it because she knew that somewhere in the chaos of that battle, people were dying who could have been saved if she had been allowed to fight. The first phase of the battle was ending, but something far more important was about to begin. And it would force every species in the galaxy to reconsider everything they thought they knew about humanity. The second phase of the battle was barely when the sensors on the ISS Pioneer detected the massive dreadnought moving away from the main conflict. Captain Foster studied the readings on his screen and felt something cold move through his chest. The dreadnought was not heading toward the Alliance forces. It was heading toward the civilian evacuation station, where families were waiting to be transported to safety. Foster checked the coordinates 3 times to be absolutely sure. There were no mistakes. The vessel was targeting the evacuation point. The reports said there were at least 5,000 civilians waiting there, mostly women and children from the border colonies who had fled before the invasion began. The tactical situation was impossible. The Pioneer was fast, but it was also small. A dreadnought was a weapon of war, a massive ship designed to destroy other large vessels. The Pioneer's weapons could damage it, but they could not stop it. The math was simple and terrible. If Foster took his ship to intercept the dreadnought, his crew would die. They might slow the dreadnought, but they would not save the civilians. They would just become casualties in a larger disaster. Foster opened a communication channel to the ISS Venture and explained what he had discovered. He asked for permission to move his ship to the evacuation site. He asked for orders about what he should do. Captain Hayes received the message, and she knew immediately what Foster was asking. She also knew what the commander would order. She checked the battle formation and this predetermined response plan. There was nothing in the plan about a dreadnought moving towards civilians. The commander would order Foster to report the threat and maintain his position in the formation. By the time the council made a decision and organized a response, the dreadnought would reach the evacuation point. Hayes looked at Foster's ship position on her tactical display. The Pioneer was close enough to reach the evacuation station in less than an hour. It was the only ship that could get there in time. She gave Foster permission to break formation and move to the evacuation site. She told him to do everything he could to protect the civilians. And then she cut the communication before Foster could acknowledge the order, because she knew that doing so would make her officially responsible for Foster's actions, and she needed to preserve the possibility that humanity could claim the decision was made at a lower command level. Foster did not hesitate. He had never hesitated in his entire military career. When you saw something that needed to be done, you did it. That was how humans worked. That was the core belief that had driven human civilization for thousands of years. He ordered his crew to maximum speed. The engines of the Pioneer screamed as they pushed the ship to limits that the designers had said were dangerous. The crew felt the vibration through the deck plating. Every person on that ship knew what they were doing. They were racing toward a fight they could not win, to protect people they had never met. Engineer worked in the engine room, monitoring systems and redirecting power to the engines. She was the best engineer in the human fleet, and she knew every system of this ship like it was part of her own body. She pushed the engines beyond their rated capacity, knowing it might cause permanent damage, knowing the ship might explode if something went wrong. She did it anyway. Foster gathered his senior staff in the ready room, the small space where officers met to discuss strategy. He looked at each person and saw their fear. He saw it clearly, and he did not try to hide his own fear from them. He told them that they were going to intercept a dreadnought that outweighed them 10 times over. He told them that they would probably die. And he told them that 5,000 civilians would die if they did not try. His weapons officer, a woman named Susan Park, asked what the chance of success was. Foster told her the honest truth. Almost zero. But zero was different from impossible, and humans were good at doing the impossible. The Pioneer raced toward the evacuation point. The dreadnought was still moving, steady and slow, clearly not in any hurry because it expected no opposition. When the Pioneer was within weapons range, Foster ordered his gunners to open fire. The weapons did not penetrate the dreadnought's shields, but they registered. The massive ship changed course slightly, turning its weapons toward the Pioneer. This was what Foster had hoped for. He had the ship's attention now. The dreadnought began firing. The Pioneer twisted and moved, using every ounce of speed and maneuverability that it possessed. Foster knew his ship would not survive a direct hit from the dreadnought's main weapons. He did not try to win. He tried only to survive long enough to keep the dreadnought focused on him. Medical Officer Doctor stood in the ship's medical bay and prepared for casualties. He knew his ship was dying. He could feel it in the way the walls shook and the lights flickered. He prepared surgical equipment and organized supplies, knowing that he might treat injuries he could not save. He did it because that was what doctors did. They fought death even when they knew they would lose. The Pioneer took hit after hit. The shield generators failed. The rear engines exploded. The weapons systems went dark. The ship was being torn apart piece by piece, but it stayed between the dreadnought and the evacuation point. It stayed in position. It did not run. And then something extraordinary happened. 4 other human ships appeared on the tactical display, moving at maximum speed away from their assigned positions. They were breaking orders. They were leaving the formation. They were coming to help. The four ships took position with the Pioneer, spreading their weapons fire across the Dreadnought's shields. It was not a coordinated move. It was not calculated by a computer. It was humans seeing one of their own facing impossible odds and moving to share the burden. It was humans doing what humans did when they saw courage and knew that someone needed help. The Dreadnought shifted its fire. Now it was facing 5 human ships instead of 1. The combined fire was still not enough to penetrate the shields, but it was enough to distract the ship. The evacuation transport began its emergency departure, moving the civilians away from the danger. Foster watched the display and saw the first civilian ships escaping. He knew then that they had done it. They had bought enough time. The civilians would survive. His crew had given them that chance. The commander's voice cut through all communications, filled with rage. He ordered the human ships to return to formation immediately. He said they had violated every order, compromised the battle's strategy, and acted with complete disregard for military discipline. Foster did not respond to the order. He was too busy fighting. The Pioneer was dying around him, and his crew was working to keep it together long enough for the civilian evacuation to complete. The rest of the human ships formed a defensive shield around the Pioneer, protecting it with their own hulls and their own shields. And across the galaxy, watching through the eyes of sensors and telescopes, the ancient peoples began to understand something they had never known before. They watched humans choose death rather than abandon their own. They watched humans move toward danger to protect strangers. They watched a species that was willing to give everything for something they believed in. The civilian evacuation completed. The last transport jumped to hyperspace, carrying 5,000 people to safety. The Dreadnought, facing 5 determined human ships, finally turned away and returned to the main battle. The human ships had survived, barely, damaged almost beyond repair, but alive. And in that moment the learned a truth about humanity that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. The third phase of the battle changed everything. The commander's voice came across all communication channels, and his tone had transformed. He was no longer giving orders to humans as if they were inferior units to be managed. He was giving orders to soldiers who had proven themselves. Told the human ships that they would no longer be restricted to the perimeter. They would be assigned specific objectives based on their unique capabilities. The commander did something that was almost unheard of in military communication. He asked for suggestions from Captain Hayes about how humanity could best help achieve victory. Hayes stood on the bridge of the Venture and felt something shift inside her. For 3 years she had been treated like an outsider. Now, in the middle of a galactic war, she was finally being treated like a true ally. She sent a message to explaining how human ships could be most effective. Humans were fast and adaptable. They could respond to changes in the battle more quickly than larger vessels. They understood warfare on an intuitive level, not just a mathematical one. They could fill gaps in the defensive perimeter where calculations had not accounted for unexpected enemy movements. Accepted her analysis completely. He gave the human ships a new set of objectives. Where there was a gap in the Alliance defense, humans would move to fill it. Where fighters broke through the formation, humans would pursue and destroy them. Where Allied ships were in danger, humans would move to protect them. The human fleet transformed in that moment. No longer restrained, no longer limited to specific positions, they became like a sword with perfect awareness and perfect timing. When they held the line of battle, humans reinforced it. When the ships needed protection, humans surrounded them with defensive fire. Captain Johnson, commanding the ISS Independence, led a formation of 3 ships into a gap that they had left undefended. It was a textbook military maneuver, but what made it human was the split-second decision-making. When the expected attack vector changed, did not recalculate the approach. He felt the change and adjusted his tactics instantly. The forces began to break apart. They had been designed to counter large, predictable formations. They had been designed to overwhelm enemy positions through superior numbers and firepower. They had not been designed to face opponents who moved like humans moved, who thought like humans thought, who valued something more important than victory. A cruiser took severe damage from an unexpected enemy attack. Its shields were failing. Its weapons were compromised. The ship was about to be destroyed when two human fighters positioned themselves between the cruiser and the incoming fire. The human ships took the damage that should have killed the vessel. One human fighter was destroyed. The crew of the other fighter ejected into space, but they had bought the ship time to repair and recover. The elder, who had sat silently through the first two phases of the battle, finally stood up and gave new orders to his ancient weapon systems. He told them to fire in support of human positions, to protect the species that was protecting them. It was the first time in 1,000 years that they had taken orders that were not based on pure calculation and ancient tradition. The ships began to study human combat patterns, trying to understand what made human tactics so effective when every calculation said they should fail. The answer was simple but impossible to express in mathematical terms. Humans fought for something beyond victory. They fought for honor. They fought for the people next to them. They fought because that was what it meant to be human. As the battle continued into its fourth hour, the momentum had completely reversed. The Alliance was no longer fighting to survive. The Alliance was fighting to win. And they were winning because humans had shown them how to fight with something more than just firepower and calculation. Captain Hayes received a direct communication from. The commander told her that the human forces had saved the Alliance fleet at least 3 times in the past hour alone. He said that they had been wrong about humanity. He said that humans were not decorative pieces on a military board. Humans were warriors in the truest sense of the word. Hayes did not respond to the compliment immediately. She was too focused on the battle. But she filed the words away, knowing that they would matter later, knowing that they would change how the galaxy saw her species. The commander made a critical error at that moment. He tried to concentrate his forces for one final massive attack that would break the Alliance line, but he did not account for human adaptability. He did not expect the human ships to move in perfect coordination with the vessels, creating a formation that was stronger than any of its individual parts. The attack collapsed before it even reached its target. The combined fleet, working together in a way that would have been impossible just hours before, turned the attack aside and pushed back against the forces. One human pilot, a woman named Rachel, guided a damaged missile through a gap in the dreadnought's defenses. The missile penetrated the shield generators. The dreadnought's shields collapsed. Suddenly, the massive vessel was vulnerable, and the entire Alliance fleet moved to exploit the weakness. When the dreadnought finally exploded, every species in the Alliance fleet felt the impact. The explosion marked the moment when they realized they could not win. They could not defeat an enemy that had learned to fight as one. They could not conquer a species that stood with others rather than standing alone. The commander issued the order to withdraw. The invasion fleet turned around and began retreating back toward space. The battle was not over yet, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The Alliance would hold. The Alliance would survive. And it would survive because humans had taught them how to be more than just separate species fighting side by side. Captain Hayes watched the enemy fleet retreat and felt the weight of what had happened. Her ships had proven themselves. Humanity had proven itself. But the real victory was something deeper. The real victory was that the galaxy had learned to see humanity not as outsiders or newcomers, but as warriors worth fighting beside. In the medical bay of the Venture, Doctor worked to heal injuries and save lives. She treated humans and aliens with equal dedication, and she understood that this work was just as important as the combat above. Every life saved was a testament to what it meant to be human. The battle continued for another hour, mopping up remaining forces and securing the Meridian sector. But from that moment forward, Everyone in the galaxy knew that humanity had arrived, not as visitors, not as observers, as partners, as warriors, as a species that the galaxy needed, returned to the observation deck of the diplomatic station 3 days after the battle ended. Earth still turned below him, blue and beautiful and unchanged by the events that had just unfolded across the galaxy. But everything else had changed. Everything. The celebration was still ongoing throughout the station. They had opened their cargo holds and shared food and drink with every other species present. They had prepared formal documents recognizing humanity's contribution to the victory. They, in their own quiet way, had sent a message expressing something that might have been respect from a species that had not used that word in 1,000 years. The human crews were being celebrated as heroes. News broadcasts from Earth were reporting the victory continuously, and already people were starting to write songs and tell stories about what had happened at the Meridian sector. The names of Captain Hayes, Captain Foster, and the other human commanders were being spoken with reverence. Children on Earth were hearing stories about humans who had protected civilians and saved entire alien fleets. But understood something deeper than the celebration. He understood that the real significance was not what humans had done, it was why humans had done it. An old admiral named approached him at the observation window. The admiral was ancient by standards, covered in scars from battles that stretched back centuries. He had fought in conflicts that most species had never even heard of. He had killed and had been nearly killed more times than anyone could count. Stood next to and looked out at the stars. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. He said that in all his cycles of life, in all the battles he had fought, he had never seen a species fight the way humans fought. He said that they were strong, and they were intelligent, and they were wise. But humans possessed something that no other species had ever truly understood. Asked the old admiral what that thing was, paused for a long time before answering. He said that humans fought like they had everything to lose and everyone to protect. He said that humans did not fight for glory or conquest or mathematical advantage. Humans fought because another being was in danger, and they could not accept that danger continuing. Explained that they had spent thousands of years learning to fight perfectly, every move calculated, every tactic measured, every decision made based on pure logic and probability. But what had learned in 3 days of fighting with humans was that perfect calculation was not the same as victory. Perfect logic could be beaten by beings who understood sacrifice. The old admiral turned to face directly. He said something that would be repeated across the galaxy for generations to come. He said that humanity was a species that the stars themselves would have to acknowledge. He said that human names would be spoken in halls of power and on the bridges of warships. He said that when young species asked what it meant to be truly great, the answer would be to be like the humans. Felt something move through him as he listened to the old admiral's words. He had believed in humanity his whole life. He had known that humans were capable of extraordinary things, but he had never imagined that the galaxy would see it so clearly. He had never imagined that underestimation and dismissal could be so completely reversed by a single act of courage. Messages began arriving from species that had not even been present at the battle. The who lived on the far side of the galaxy sent a formal declaration of recognition for humanity's actions. The collective, an alliance of 7 minor species, requested formal diplomatic relations with Earth. The ancient machines that guarded the outer territories, entities that had not communicated with biological life in thousands of years, sent a single message acknowledging humanity's presence. General Winters sent a communication from Earth. She was sitting in her office and could see that she had been crying. She told him that the news of the battle had reached Earth and the entire planet was in celebration. She told him that humanity had become something more than just another species in the galaxy. Humanity had become legendary. The general also sent tactical data that had not expected. Human ships that had been damaged in the battle were being repaired with help from engineers and resources. The Alliance was not just celebrating the victory. The Alliance was preparing for a lasting partnership. For the first time in the history of the galactic community, the younger species was being treated as an equal. Captain Hayes sent a personal message. She was exhausted and her ship was heavily damaged, but her voice was clear. She said that her crew had done what they believed was right. She said that every person on the ISS Venture would do it again if they had to. She said that protecting others was not a burden for humans. It was an honor. It was what it meant to be human. Captain Foster's message was shorter. He was recovering from injuries he had received when the ISS Pioneer was damaged. He simply said that he would follow the same orders again. He said that 5,000 civilians had lived because his crew had been willing to die. Nothing could be more important than that. Opened a secure channel back to Earth and spoke directly with the President of the United Nations. He explained what he had witnessed. He explained that the galaxy had seen humanity at its best, and that humanity would never again be treated as an inferior species. He said that Earth's children would grow up knowing that their species had made a difference in the galaxy. The President asked what he thought would happen next, took a moment to consider the question. He thought about and how their respect had shifted from distant and cold to genuine and warm. He thought about and their ancient acknowledgement of something new and powerful. He thought about the smaller species that were now looking to humanity for leadership and protection. He told the President that humanity would face new responsibilities. With the galaxy's recognition came the expectation that humans would stand against injustice. With the celebration came the weight of legacy. Humanity would be called upon to protect others, to stand against enemies, and to do what was right even when it was difficult. But also said something else. He said that humans had proven something fundamental about themselves. They had proven that they could be trusted. They had proven that their word meant something. They had proven that when the chips were down, humans would choose honor over safety, others over themselves, and doing what was right over winning glory. 3 weeks later, attended a formal ceremony where the Galactic Council officially recognized humanity as a full and equal member of the Greater Alliance. Not a provisional member, not a junior member, a full member with all the rights and responsibilities that came with it. As watched the ceremony unfold, he thought back to his first day at the diplomatic station. He thought about standing at this same observation window and watching Earth turn slowly below him, wondering why he had been assigned to such a thankless job. Now he understood. He had been here to witness the moment when humanity transformed from curiosity to legend. He had been here to see the moment when the galaxy learned what humans truly were. And he had been here to understand why, from this moment forward, the name of humanity would echo across the stars like a prayer and a promise. In every corner of known space, beings would hear the story. Young species would aspire to be like humans, to fight with the same courage and honor. Ancient civilizations would record the tale of the moment when newcomers showed the galaxy that greatness was not measured in age or firepower, but in the willingness to stand against darkness and protect those who could not protect themselves. And standing at the observation window with the weight of history behind him, understood that this was only the beginning. The galaxy would never be the same, and humanity, the remarkable species from a blue planet orbiting a yellow sun, would stand forever as a beacon of what courage and sacrifice could achieve. The stars above Earth had gained a new constellation, and in that constellation, humanity would burn bright for all eternity.